Mirror's Edge Catalyst, the second entry in the Mirror's Edge franchise. Unfortunately, a series that is now considered dead, because EA is probably not going to make another one, even though it is a series that really deserves a third entry. But I want to talk about Mirror's Edge Catalyst because I finished it, and it was really much greater than I expected from all I heard online. In my heart, it is, well, really a hidden gem nowadays. It came out in 2016, I think. 9 years ago by now. It really deserves more. But let's dive into what I think about the different aspects of the game, right? Let's start by the gameplay. Of course, the core mechanics are centered on fluid parkour and freedom of movement. This is very important. This is the identity of Mirror's Edge. Parkour, free running through a city, making your way through the urban environment. And in my opinion, no other game has really come close to that. There's an emphasis on becoming faster and more efficient, because through Catalyst, there's many time trials from point A to point B. There's plenty of that through the city. All these side activities mostly consist of time trials that you would have found in the first game as bonus content. But also you can replay all the missions of the game, side missions or main missions. You can replay them and there will be a timer actually that indicates which is your best time. So if you feel like speedrunning levels, feel free to do it. The game is actually encouraging you to do that, which is also an aspect that was present in the first game. In a way, you could say that Mirror's Edge and Mirror's Edge Catalyst are racing games, platformer racing games, because you have to optimize routes and master the game's mechanics to get the fastest times, just like any other racing game really. And the sprawling city of Catalyst is a playground. It's the ideal playground that you might have wanted as a kid actually. Even without objectives, it's simply moving through a city that is rewarding. The gameplay is so fluid and good that just being able to move about is a treat in and of itself. And once you master the mechanics of the game, then it is really perfect. You will have a great time. I want to talk a bit about the character of Faith actually in that game compared to the first game. You know, the Faith from the 2008 game Mirror's Edge was pretty mature, confident and experienced. Maybe a bit older, you know. She was focused and assured on her path and role as a runner. Whereas the Faith in Catalyst, it's a different kind of Faith. She seems younger, she's more vulnerable and more emotionally driven. She goes through a bit of a coming of age story really, where she learns responsibility, she grows more into her role as a runner and she confronts more of her past because her past is a bit more loaded than the first Faith. She can be interpreted as a reimagined version or a younger counterpart in the shared universe. You could take Mirror's Edge Catalyst as not a... Well, yes, you could take it as a reboot, but it is also a sequel. It takes place, it seems, much later in the future. So it would also make sense that this Faith is not the same Faith, but another person called Faith, like just someone with the same name and a similar background, because ultimately it's not that uncommon. So it is perfectly reasonable to think that she's her own character, but she could become more like the Faith of the first game in a sequel where she could become more mature, a leader for the runner, where she would bring up the next generation of them. You know, she could actually take on a role a bit like Ezio from Assassin's Creed 2, that also becomes more of a mentor in his following subsequent games. I now want to talk a bit about the setting, the place where the game Catalyst takes place, the city design and the atmosphere. The city of glass is a character in and of itself, right? It's divided into distinct districts with each their own architecture and their own color and tone. It is different. They each have a different music, colors, and when you go through the environment, you can feel that the theme of the places are different. It can be pretty ordinary rooftops or construction sites or more luxurious apartments, but they all represent, in and of itself, the beautiful utopia of that future, but that is also oppressive in fact, because everything is scrubbed clean of any filth. It feels weirdly artificial in a way, because everything is ultimately under heavy surveillance. It is a bit under military security control. But yeah, the exploration of this city, it ranges from the high rooftops, of the city, to underground pipeworks in abandoned foundations that the new city is built upon. And you can kind of see that when you go into the depth of the city. You can see the foundations that show a contrast between the old and the new, when everything wasn't so controlled yet. But at the same time, there's a massive untapped potential, because there's a massive map, right? But there's tons of unexplored areas, which could have suggested actually some DLC or expansions that would have added more districts and further story content. But that's not going to be the case anymore. But if you open the map of the game, you can really see that the playground, the place where you play, is really tiny in compare to everything that is situated outside of the boundaries of the playground you have access to. It is quite huge, and I really thought I was going to see more of the city. Okay, there's also more about the lore of the place of that world, like another city, a neighboring city called Omnistat, I think, and that's a rival city that is hinted at, but of course that's not explored. That would be so interesting to explore that in another subsequent game. A bit about the story actually. There's some themes right there. Themes, we love themes in games and media, and here it's about freedom versus control, the runner's lifestyle that contrasts with the society, surveillance-driven order, the facade of perfection that's hiding the darkness and oppression and perhaps corruption too. And it is a pretty strong message, because ultimately that's a future that we're rapidly slipping towards, where there's no privacy and everything is controlled. I thought all in all the story was pretty serviceable, it was pretty nice to me. It tied closely to the gameplay and the world and the narrative. And I felt some emotion, as there's like an emotional weight, as Faith, as she grows and she confronts losses of relatives and people close to her, and she has to face responsibilities that she may not have wanted to get in the first place. But at the same time, I understand that there's loose threads in the narrative that were pretty obviously left there for a sequel. A lot of cool plot threads, like the Black November terrorist organization, is pretty left out after a certain point in the story. Perhaps that is more hints that the development team would have really wanted to develop more this whole world and its lore. Now, of course, I want to talk a bit about the music. The music of Mirror's Edge is iconic, it's memorable, you know where it comes from. And in Catalyst, the music is also really good, just like in the first game. It's ambient and I would say a bit dreamlike. And there's a certain melancholia actually in the soundtrack. When I'm listening to the soundtrack, it inspires feelings of longing, of freedom to me, of nostalgia, it makes me want to reach for an unreachable, dreamlike world. It elevates the sense of immersion, and it complements the absolutely awesome clean aesthetic very well. It heightens the emotional resonance of the gameplay, of the movement. I think it fills you with purpose that just marries super well with parkour. I think, with the whole feeling and vibe of the game. It is so good. And also it fits the futuristic theme of the game very well as well. Just loading the game, you can hear these artificial noises that trickle down like rain. Data being loaded, of course, but it sounds very beautiful to me. Of course, one cannot talk about Mirror's Edge without talking about the aesthetic and design of the whole thing. There's a clean minimalist architecture and colors with, stark white surfaces that are contrasted by saturated colors like red, blues, oranges, greens, and that highlight the environment. The wide facades of the buildings have these beautiful colors that are also incorporated into them, that give each district their own identity. And of course there's the red of Mirror's Edge that also highlights the elements that you can interact with as a runner, of course. And that's actually finally more integrated into the lore, that this is augmented virtuality that is a software loaded in your contact lenses per se to help runners move through the urban environment. But I think all these colors and aesthetics and buildings, I think it represents more, like it wants to be structured perfection, but the colors are different. They present individuality, and when you have a society, it cannot be helped. There will be individuality in there. It can't be all homogeneous. There has to be something different somewhere. That it is in people, in ideologies, in tastes, in feelings. So even though the city desires to be perfect and a white paradise, the city of glass is a place where, despite control, there is and always be freedom somewhere, which is actually tied into the narrative because they even want to take freedom of mind there. And that's a stake that's a bit higher than in the first game. But also the city, it's a beautiful playground because it's so geometric, rectangular buildings, a lot of nicely angled surfaces. It's optimized for parkour. It's an utopia turned into a runner's perfect traversal space. It's the perfect playground for people that want to just move. It's a city that wants to control people and their movements by creating very defined spaces. But all this geometry creates the perfect opportunity for humans to express themselves in movement, in freedom. They can just run because there's no bushes in the way. There's just surfaces to climb and jump from. And that's beautiful in a way, isn't it? Because I think ultimately one of the aspects of the game is that movement is very human, right? We all crave movement. Our blood is moving. Our hands are constantly moving by pumping the blood. Our breath is constantly in a state of movement to keep us alive. And we humans then crave movement. If we don't move, our bodies deteriorate, our minds deteriorate. And in the end, cannot you see that being a runner is actually more of a state of mind? It's telling you to always be on the move, always be active, and also stay free. That is in your mind. Of course, you will still have responsibilities, but it's more like to be flowing like water, to adapt, I think. And to jump everywhere and to do parkour, because fucking parkour is awesome. But the legacy and lost potential of the Mirror's Edge catalyst, or Mirror's Edge as a whole, really. It's a franchise that has such a unique identity. It is a revolutionary series that is combining parkour with this unique aesthetic and music that is unmatched in any other game. I've never seen that in any other game. No other game captured the same sense of freedom of movement that Mirror's Edge has. And that is something that the industry then is losing by not continuing to keep this franchise in the greater gaming mind and catalog by developing new entries. I think we are losing something here. Why? Because there's copyright neglect, of course. I mean, EA has more of a focus on live service games, right? Innovative art like Mirror's Edge is just put on the sideline and all completely abandoned for profit of live service. That is in and of itself an unsustainable way to make games, I think. Live service games are killing creativity because then you cannot dare risk and create innovative games that are like art, really. Like Mirror's Edge will always be a classic, a masterpiece because of what it is. And it's a shame we're never going to get that again, I think. Catalyst had, I think I understand, a mixed reception, so that also diminished maybe the chance to get a sequel to that game, even though it might have really deserved one. If there was ever a sequel to Mirror's Edge Catalyst, I think I would like to maybe expand to a new city. Maybe in Omnistad, this city that has been talked about in the first game, or at least really enlarge the city of glass. You could have this familiar environment that you explored in the first game, Catalyst, while also creating a lot more to play with, a more immense background, a playground that you could traverse. That would be so amazing with like all the technology that we got in next gen now. That would be so fantastic. And have new stories, characters, maybe even a new protagonist that would also be a runner, maybe. Or maybe a Kruger-sec person that just escapes the system. I think that there's definitely ways to make the story super interesting, because there's a lot of loose threads in the plot and subplots that could be resolved in a sequel, I think, like with Black November, for example, or what happens to Kat at the end. But Mirror's Edge, I will tell you this to end the video. The first game and Catalyst are games that deserve to be preserved and remembered. They are very unique, they are very relevant in our society, and there's really no other games like them. They are very beloved. The first game maybe more than the second one, but still, I love the first game, I love the second one. I think they're very close to my heart. They're very dear to me and I will always remember them. I often listen to their music. They bring a lot to me. And I would really, really love if there was just a third game that wasn't pushed with 1,000 microtransactions. That was just a fun game, a complete experience that would let me explore yet another city, be free, and do movements that I'm not able to do in real life because I get injured constantly. There is still a lot of untapped potential, and it makes me so sad to see all this potential that is lost because it is not worked on. It needs to be worked on. You cannot just let such a good product die. What do you think about Mirror's Edge, the first one, and Catalyst? Have you played both? Have you played Catalyst? What are the strong points of the games that you really enjoy, and maybe what are the parts of Catalyst that you might have liked less? And do you also agree that we need a Mirror's Edge 3? Stay put for the next video, I'll see you there, okay? Cheers!